I'm pleased to welcome back to the show the 1-2 punch that the deep state will definitely hate. We've got Kevin Shipp and Larry Klayman. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be with you.
We've become a little bit of a team. We've had this trio together a few times. We're going to talk today about the Robert Mueller report that was released last week. It's been all the rage. People, the pundits on the left and the right have been just knocking themselves out as to whether this exonerates the president or puts it in the hands of the Congress to decide what will happen. I wanted to bring you guys together because you've got unique viewpoints on this topic. What have we learned from the report so far?
Go ahead, Larry.
What we've learned is that Mueller is very Machiavellian, is that he threw this out to Congress. There's going to be an impeachment proceeding. There's no doubt about it. Elizabeth Warren is already out there pounding the beat, Miss Pocahontas and company. You've got the two Muslim congresswomen who are obviously out there stirring it up, but you've got Gerald Nadler, head of the House and Judiciary Committee, Adam Schiff, head of the House Intelligence Committee, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi's playing a game. It's going to happen, and that's what Mueller had in mind. And he saw what Ken Starr did back with Clinton in the late 1990s, is that he threw it out to Congress and it resulted in impeachment. And although the conventional wisdom is that, and I say conventional wisdom because frankly it's not wisdom, it's stupidity, that impeachment will hurt the Democrats, they saw how the Republicans used the impeachment with regard to Bill Clinton to weaken both Clinton and Gore, which resulted in the election of George W. Bush. And they're doing the same thing here. Of course, there was a valid basis to do it with regard to Clinton. They could have actually taken him out, not just on Lewinsky, but on Chinagate, Filegate, IRSgate, everything else. But here they're going to use it for political purposes, hoping that they get their socialist, atheist, anti-Semite, anti-Christian candidate in place in 2020. And at this point, it looks like it might be our friend Bernie, who I think last week there was a video that was found where he was dancing half naked in Moscow during his campaign.
Whoa.
So
does that count as Russian collusion, Larry?
No, but I think it's cruel and unusual punishment to see Bernie naked. I mean, that's quite apart from his Bolshevik self.
Now, let me ask you this, Larry. You were pivotally involved in the, various things surrounding the impeachment of Bill Clinton. You are the only attorney to ever receive a judgment against a sitting president. Am I stating that correctly?
It was a ruling by Judge Royce Lamberth that Bill Clinton had committed a crime when he released the Privacy Act protected files of a woman he had sexually assaulted in the Oval Office, who was my client, Kathleen Willey. She later became my client. And I represented nearly all the Clinton women, so to speak. But yes, that was a ruling. And the real story there, and you can read about it in my book, Whores, W-H-O-R-E-S, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. You can still get it at Amazon.com, is that the Lewinsky scandal drew one away in terms of the media from the real scandal, which was being bribed by the Chinese. Clinton was being bribed by the Chinese at the time, right. And also the misuse of FBI files. And it was Bob Barr and I and Dave Schippers, who was the House impeachment manager, that wanted to expand that impeachment to include those scandals, which would have been a knockout punch. But of course, Newt Gingrich, the cynical Newt Gingrich, who has regained some form of credibility in recent years, he deep-sixed that. He just wanted to wound Clinton enough to harm Gore in the 2000 elections. And, it worked. I give him credit for that. But that didn't bring about justice. That brought about an idiot as president, George W. Bush.
Well, and we also want to make sure that people don't confuse Bob Barr with the current Attorney General, William Barr. And this takes me, Kevin, to you. Your time in the CIA, did it coincide with Bill Clinton's president? Remind us exactly when you were in the CIA.
Yeah, I was in the CIA originally under Ronald Reagan. That's when I joined up, and then I was there under the Clinton administration. And kind of humorous side note, when President Clinton would come to the lobby of CIA headquarters to give some speech or something, we'd all go out to the local Thai restaurant because we just couldn't stand it. But morale was low. We all knew that Clinton was compromising classified information. There wasn't a darn thing we could do about it.
Wow, that's what I wanted to get into. How could the CIA not act, knowing that the President of the United States was, everything having to do with Chinagate? What went on there?
Well, you could call it cowardice or fear, I suppose. We know, of course, that Clinton also lost the nuclear codes for over 3 months. I mean, the guy was he was just really off the rails. And as I have is the agency was forced to give Hillary Clinton a CIA clearance when she was first lady, had no access, no background investigation, no polygraph, no nothing. She was given the keys to the kingdom. Obviously, she leaned on Bill to demand it, and everybody went belly up and gave it to her.
Larry, what do you think about that? We've just completed a 2-year investigation into a president that was found not guilty of any of the charges of conspiring with a foreign power, and the deep state, the former CIA director, John Brennan, seems directly involved. Now Kevin's telling us that during the time you were in the Department of Justice, we had a president who actually was conspiring with members of dangerous foreign powers. Nothing was done.
Well, that's par for the course. The Clintons, I used to tell kind of a joke about it, that they sold everything in the White House, our national security, everything else. China was a big buyer. And I used to joke, I said, let's hope the Clintons didn't sell their cat's socks to the Chinese. I mean, poor socks in that event.
Yes, and it's worth noting, and I know because I was in the Counterintelligence Center, that China is the #1 espionage enemy of the United States. #1, and they're good. And yet this guy I didn't, but this guy they put in the White House, Bill Clinton, was selling sensitive satellite technology, which is now being used in weaponry by the Chinese government.
Yeah, well, that's right. It was Bernie Schwartz of Loral who paid $100,000 to go on a Clinton trade mission through Ron Brown. May his soul rest in peace. He was the one who was orchestrating it for Hillary. There's a big story about that. You can read about it again in my book, Horse, but you can also read it about in a book by Jack Cashel, Ron Brown's Body,
right. Which
is an important book. And, the Clintons were selling everything to the Chinese, and Bernie Schwartz of Loral Corporation was also collaborating with the Chinese, turning over our missile technology so Chinese missiles could be more accurate. And, Chinagate was the real scandal. That was the big scandal. Even Bob Woodward was on to that at the time. But the press, was drawn away by the salacious sex stuff with Monica Lewinsky. And that actually protected Clinton. That's why he survived. That's the thesis of my book. Because without that, he would have been exposed to a continuing Chinagate scandal. And then I might add also that there were hearings on Chinagate. A select joint committee of both the Senate and the House was in panel. And what happened then is the Democrats were very smart and clever. They dug up dirt on the Republicans. Haley Barbour was doing business with the Chinese, and it was head of the Republican National Committee in Hong Kong, and it was checkmate. And they all ran away from and passed the McCain old campaign finance legislation, which was like saying to O.J. Simpson, let's pass a law so I will not kill again. And McCain-Feingold was largely ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court later on. That was John McCain's legacy to our country.
Now, Larry, of course, there's no statute of limitations on espionage, and we're hearing about missile technology, satellite technology. I've heard that this compromise of U.S. technology basically enabled the Chinese space program, which, just think about the economic warfare that China is able to wage in the future as privatization of space industry becomes, according to Wilbur Ross, the next billion or trillion-dollar industry. Why is nothing being done today? These, the Clintons are still active in the public, sphere and trying to be active in politics. We've heard that Hillary has just reinstated her law license. I mean, these two are the most lawless criminals. Every day, it's just, my mind is blown.
Well, it is, and it's this protection racket, you see. And I did my radio show Saturday. It's broadcast on Sunday. Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman. You can find it at freedomwatchusa.org. And I was talking about Jerry Corsi and my client, who we brought lawsuits against Mueller. We're seeking justice at the Justice Department, but Kevin knows, and in our government, our deep state government, they circle the wagons and they protect themselves. And there is an unwritten agreement between the establishments of both political parties that we won't gore each other's oxes, that we will continue on in this money chain, the money changers at the temple in Washington, D.C., and the power exchangers. And we will just simply go on Fox News, CNN, or MSNBC, and we'll raise money for the next election, but no one will be held accountable. So Hillary Clinton is held accountable. And, you know, we're continuing to try to do that with our citizens' grand juries and lawsuits, and hopefully we'll break through. But the Justice Department isn't going to do it. And I was just visiting the Bundys this week in Nevada. You know, after their indictment was thrown out by a hostile judge, Gloria Navarro, it was the Bill Barr Justice Department that authorized an appeal to overturn that dismissal. Can you believe that? So don't count on Bill Barr doing anything beyond what he's already done. We're grateful that, you know, he allegedly cleared the president, but of course that's not going to be enough to stop impeachment in any event. The deep state in Washington is alive and well. And the deep state at the CIA, where Kevin spent time, I applied when I was in law school too, but I didn't go that route.
Thank God.
Yeah, I did. No, it's another story I can tell some other time. But you know,
well, guys,
it works against us. First of all, let me just say one quick thing. I interviewed a guy from the CIA who met me in some hotel room at the Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. I was going to Emory Law School. I said, "Is it really like 7 days in May or whatever the case was, 3 days in May?" And he said, "No, actually, that was the film version. It's 7 days in May."
Just, Kevin, before you respond, wouldn't it be more accurate to say that William Barr really upheld the law more so than clearing the president? Larry?
Well, yeah. I mean, Bill Barr did the absolute minimum. Okay, and I give him credit for that. Sessions wouldn't have done that. But he's not going to be seeking justice with regard to Rod Rosenstein, who was standing behind him. Rosenstein was being held hostage. I mean, he was in effect told, either you go along with this or you're going to pay the price. But here's a real traitor. He's not going to be held accountable. McCabe won't be held accountable. The rest of them, this is part of the Washington Club. And that's why we do what we do at Freedom Watch, seeking to hold them accountable.
Yeah, and
amen
at the
to that.
CIA, Kevin, I guess your hands were kind of tied. You were sort of given orders and you had to carry them out, right?
Well, yeah, and the layers of secrecy in the CIA, that's where it gets its power from, and that's what's led to a lot of corruption. And of course, as you know, I stood up against that myself. They were classifying documents that were unclassified, but indicated the poisoning of some people. So I saw the deep state shadow government changing that. I mean, miracles do happen. That's why we pray. But changing that gross system with the CIA, specifically the shadow government and the deep state, all things are possible with the American people, in my view. And I like Larry's approach of people getting active and doing things. But it is a mess. And that's why we see these great orations by Trey Gowdy. And after anything happens, you know, so.
Well, Kevin's hit the nail on the head with Gowdy. I mean, extortion 17, the greatest loss of life in the Afghan war. There was a phony hearing that was held by Jason Chaffetz, who decided he was going to leave and took a job as a consultant for Fox News. He's better there than he ever was as head of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. But Gowdy didn't even show up for that hearing. He's all talk, no action.
Wow.
Gowdy, Kevin's absolutely right, it's a complete phony.
Well, what do we think, guys, about Trey Gowdy and the Boeing headquarters, or I should say the Boeing manufacturing facility in his state? I mean, that's deep state money flowing right to him, isn't it, Kevin?
Well, yeah, well, that's how these guys do it, guys and ladies, is they get money funded to projects in their state, like Dirty Harry Reid did, bought up land, and just so happened they were about to pass legislation on to double its value. That's how these people get rich, is by doing things like that, using cutouts to make money through their friends, their relatives, or some so-called philanthropic organization, and they become millionaires.
Well, right. Bernie's a millionaire right now. I mean, just on this book, God knows what else he's got stashed away somewhere. Lyndon Johnson came in as a school teacher, went out as a multimillionaire after he was president of the United States. Figure that one out.
Right.
It's a scam. It's a RICO enterprise that's conducted throughout Washington, D.C. by both Democrats and Republican establishment figures.
Yes, it is.
Right. And Kevin, did you ever deal with a woman named Joanne Isham when you were at the CIA?
No, I don't know the name.
See, it's interesting because there's all these companies that, you know, Maxar is a satellite technology company, and we've heard about how, is it John Deutsch who was the CEO of Schlumberger when that oil rig exploded? I can't believe the name is escaping me right now, but Deepwater Horizon. And we've got all these deep state players who then go, I mean, let's be clear, deep state is not just the CIA and the FBI, it's this really deadly revolving door between the American corporatocracy and the US government.
Yep, right on, that's exactly right.
So how does that play into...
And the labor unions.
And how Larry, how does this all play into what we saw transpire over the last 2 years with Robert Mueller's investigation, and now the Robert Mueller report, and now it's almost like the postscript of the Robert Mueller report is just getting going.
That's right. And see, you've got to destroy Donald Trump. I mean, he's a threat to them. Donald Trump does what he thinks is right. I mean, you may not always agree with it. I agree with it about 99% of the time, I might add. And, you know, he makes a few remarks every now and then, which is great. In my opinion, he says what he thinks. I mean, when does anybody ever do that in the Washington, D.C. swamp? But they have to destroy him because he's not really a Republican. He's Donald Trump, you see. So, I mean, you even got Kellyanne Conway's so-called husband, George Conway, trying to destroy him. Part of poor lady, really. I know Kellyanne. I don't know what she does with this dude. But, you know, this is typical of the Washington establishment, and they will not tolerate a Donald Trump. So behind his back, you've got the Paul Ryans, you've got the Trey Gowdys, you've got the rest of them that are trying to stab him in the back, and he's getting it from all sides. And that's why we, the American people, need to stand up for him.
Yeah, irrespective of what people think about his comments, his personality, etc., Donald Trump is the wrench in the Washington, D.C. works. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I mean, he is the wrench, and we won't see another president like that probably in our lifetime, assuming the country even survives another 20 years, which if the Democrats take control, I think we've got less time than that, frankly.
And Kevin, when you were at the CIA, did you ever see anybody doing anything remotely resembling? I mean, it's really unprecedented what's just happened over the past 2 years, right?
Well, that system has always been there. It was there. In the counterintelligence center, counterespionage group. I worked directly with the FBI, and my supervisor was an FBI SAC. The agents that I worked with, the FBI agents on counterintelligence cases, were great people. We got along great. But when you got up to the management level in the FBI, they would cut off your head and spit down your throat. I'll give you a quick example of that. We had an espionage case, and of course I have to be careful here. But the case was given to the FBI. They sat on it, didn't do a thing, which is relatively common, by the way. And this person wound up in tragic circumstances that were very sad due to the FBI's lack of action. I know because my associate sitting right next to me was handling this. So what did the FBI management do? They leaked the case to the press. What happened to this individual and blamed it on the CIA sitting on the case. Literally leaked a top secret espionage case to the press to cover their rear end. That has been the case. Any FBI agent will tell you for years.
Well, look at what happened with Wen-Ho Lee.
Wen-Ho Lee.
You know, I represented Notre Trulock. Wen-Ho Lee takes off with all the nuclear codes, and the FBI sits on it and does nothing. And to this day, we don't know where, you know, those codes are.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sounded to me, and I obviously don't want to prompt you to say anything that you can't talk about, Kevin, but it sounded to me like you were discussing Robert, our friend there who's stuck in Iran. What's that guy's name?
Oh, I can't remember. Yeah, Levinson. Yeah. You know, I wish for good news there, but, you know, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but that's a tough one.
Right.
Is that Levinson? Is that his name?
Robert Levinson remains in Iran. He was an FBI or he was a CIA asset, but there was something going on. Kevin, what can you tell us that helps people understand this interrelationship between the FBI and the CIA? And was that in place prior to 9/11, or all this stuff you're talking about happened after 2001?
Well, culturally, the FBI and the CIA hate each other's guts. I mean, that's endemic in both cultures. We used to have to write memos after we met with the Bureau folks. We'd have to write memos on everything that was said and done, so we didn't get stabbed in the back. So that has been a problem with them for a long, long time. The CIA and the FBI and their counter-espionage groups, after the Ames case, when I came on, they were co-located. And essentially, the Select Committee said, well, apparently the CIA can't control its problems with espionage, so we're going to put the FBI, of all people, in charge of it. And they co-located us in CIA headquarters, where we worked, as I mentioned, directly for a CIA manager. So it was, and the animosity was still there, and the behind the back memos were still there, and the CIA was, excuse me, the FBI was walking, bragging that they'd never had an espionage case like the CIA, and FBI intelligence was so much more sophisticated. And then Robert Hanssen hit.
Right.
FBI SAC in the Washington Counterintelligence Field Office. The damage he did and I'll stop here, in the words of Louis Freeh, was exceptionally grave. And that means something. It was so bad, they're not even telling anyone. He gave the entire counterintelligence file system over to the Soviets. Anyway, so FBI management has been stinky for decades, as long as I've worked with them or worked with their agents, most of which are great patriotic people. You get up in the management, and there's a kind of professional narcissism there that is a little scary.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Louis Freeh, by the way. Interesting story. I had a security guard at Judicial Watch, and he told me that during the time that Louis Freeh was planning to leave government, he was meeting with the Saudi ambassador. My security guard had previously worked for the Saudis and the ambassador, and he was actually pitching his new business to the Saudi ambassador while he was FBI director. This is Louis Freeh.
Jeez. Well, we've also heard that Louis Freeh has represented Bandar bin Sultan in something to do with 9/11. There's all this stuff going on with, Robert Mueller coming in as FBI director on September 4th, 2001. Louis Freeh, of course, was the previous FBI director. We've heard in the mainstream media about countless intelligence failures, the failure to communicate between the FBI and the CIA. Then we've got, the guy that's been investigating Donald Trump for the past 2 years, failed to properly investigate 9/11, failed to properly investigate why George W. Bush allowed members of the bin Laden family to be the only people to fly out of the United States on September 12th, why we didn't see these 28 pages of Senator Bob Graham's Intelligence Committee report until 15 years later. We've got Freeh representing Bandar. What the hell is going on here, guys?
Exactly what Kevin said. Kevin, go ahead. I mean, this is the way it works.
This is the way it's worked. I mean, you got to remember that this system has been in place for over 60 years and functioning alive and well. So that system continues. Now, and I want to mention here, too, because I'm glad you guys brought that up. During Uranium One, when we sold 20% of our uranium to the Russians, and they said, well, it never left the United States. Baloney. It went over to East Asia. So that was one of many fabrications. But as the Soviets were trying to take over 20% of our uranium, and they had actually targeted Hillary Clinton as a potential asset, it was Robert Mueller who was conducting a counterintelligence investigation of Soviet activity in the United States and completely ignored the Uranium One deal. As a matter of fact, he signed off on it, and he ignored the fact that $145 million donated by a foreign entity in Russia into Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign held in foreign banks. Robert Mueller, the incredible investigator, apparently missed all of this.
Yeah, well, and there's been a lot of discussion about how, Robert Mueller's report was worded in such a way that it didn't exonerate the president, but it didn't find enough evidence to impeach. And that's where we're sort of dancing around the difference between the criminal investigation part and the counter surveillance or the counterintelligence part. I don't know that everybody really has a clear understanding of what the difference is between those two types of investigations. I think the average American thinks you're investigating, you're looking for somebody who did something wrong. What can we talk about from the legal standpoint and the intelligence standpoint? How do those two things differ?
Before we get to that, Mueller's report was a roadmap for impeachment, as I predicted a long time ago. Predicted. It wasn't a roadmap for indictment, but it was a roadmap for impeachment. That's what he's headed for. And that's what Congress is headed for, and that's what's going to happen. It's easy to impeach. You just need a majority in the House of Representatives, and that's guaranteed. But in terms of the indictment, that's another matter, because the president can't be indicted according to Justice Department policy. So it was very clever. It was very Machiavellian. It was slick. It was sleazy what Mueller did and his prosecutors.
I always thought that impeachment was equivalent to indictment. What's the difference?
Well, impeachment is a political determination by the House of Representatives. High crimes and misdemeanors have never been defined. It's whatever they think it is in the House of Representatives. I mean, you could be having love with a horse, and you could be impeached for that, for moral turpitude, and that's the bizarre nature of our system. And that's one of the things we need to change about our system, is that it allows for the president to be paralyzed for a reason. I mean, if you did something criminal, then he should be out of there. But if he didn't do something criminal, he shouldn't be tortured by impeachment proceedings, which don't work anyway. Only twice in American history has an American president been impeached, and never has an American president been convicted in the Senate. So what's the point of it?
Right.
Yeah. And it's, I'm sorry, Jason, it's worth noting, too, that impeachment is a political process. It's not a legal process. So impeachment is done by the House as a political process or statement. It's not in the criminal justice arena at all. It's not a criminal thing. It's simply a political move.
And Kevin, what can you say that'll help us understand the differences between a criminal investigation and a counterintelligence investigation?
That is so important, Jason, because that's the slick move that they used here in the Trump campaign. A counterintelligence investigation does not need a specific crime to investigate. Now, it was really slick that the brand got Stephen Halper to spy on the Trump campaign as a counterintelligence informant, which means there didn't have to be any crime for them to insert a spy into the campaign, which they did. So those are the differences you need. And this is where Robert Mueller's report is bogus from the foundation. You have got to have a specific crime for a special prosecutor that you're going to investigate. There never has been a specific crime. There was no indication of collusion or anything even close to that before the special counsel was appointed. He was appointed on nothing. I don't know if you saw the memo they put out on his duties by Rosenstein, almost entirely blacked out. So there was no crime for him to investigate a special counsel, and that's a violation of DOJ regs right there.
We've heard a lot about Stephen Halper, but he's been basically disappeared as of late.
Yeah, I bet he has.
What do we know about this guy?
He's full, loving, and whenever you're looking for an informant, you don't want to look for the sinister looking. You want to look for the nicest person with the greatest personality that everybody likes. Well, you got old Stephen Halper, the wonderful kind of roly-poly college professor. Makes you wonder how many Cambridge professors are spies.
Right.
But he was a perfect match to put in there because of his position, because of his power, because of his connections. To actually put in as a spy. They call it an informant. Same name, same animal. So they put Halper in there, who was working for MI6. We now know that Halper was a CIA agent going all the way back to Gerald Ford.
Wow. So we've got CIA agents who are acting as FBI informants. What is it about this that isn't simply clandestine agencies conspiring to entrap United States citizens and throw them in jail?
That's what it is. There is a way that the CIA and the FBI does things. They work off each other. For example, the CIA is not supposed to have any sort of activity within the United States. I've proved that that's not the case. They're supposed to hand that over to the FBI because they're the federal law enforcement agency. They're the national cops. But they have little ways that they can work back and forth, and that nexus is counterintelligence.
And we also know that the CIA was engaging in mass surveillance against the American people domestically without probable cause. That came out. I sued the CIA, the FBI, the Justice Department, and got 2 preliminary injunctions in 2013 and 2014 that gave rise to the USA Freedom Act. They're still violating the law. It doesn't matter what the law is. They do what they want. Kevin will tell you that. Yeah. And they hope they don't get caught. So, this is the reality of the world we live in. But the CIA, the FBI, and the rest of them, they know no bounds. They can violate law, and they do.
That's right.
It's really interesting, guys. The more we talk about the CIA and the FBI, the more the transmission is breaking up. So, Larry, what can we hope as citizens? I mean, you've done some of the most incredible work with your team at freedomwatchusa.org. People can go there and support what you're doing. But, you get these injunctions and then they carry on doing the same stuff.
You got to keep punching, Jason. And of course, we do have these cases. Of course, he's got a case against Mueller for hundreds of millions of dollars, not because we want to be rich, but because we want to bankrupt Mueller as an example that this should not happen again. It's not going to happen out of the Justice Department for violating his constitutional rights, illegal surveillance, and grand jury leaks. There was just another one the other day with the Washington Post that I discussed on my radio show with Jerry, special prosecutor with Larry Klayman. You get it at freedomwatchusa.org. But we also have the citizens' grand jury, and we, the American people, need to rise up. I mean, I'm not advocating violence, but I'm afraid that's where we're headed. I'm not going to be the one at the head of the pack doing it, but I think there's going to be an explosion in the near future against our so-called government, and it's going to be fomented by the corruption in the Justice Department itself, as well as on Capitol Hill, and the people in and around the president who, frankly, many of them are not loyal to him and would like to stab him in the back. He is the equivalent of Caesar. Wow. And there are a lot of Brutuses in that White House and in the intelligence agencies, and the FBI in particular, that would like to see him legally and I believe actually dead. I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah. Let's stay on Dr. Corsi for a moment, because in many ways you guys have been the tip of the spear in terms of, the legal revolution that's gone on. It seems quite clear in retrospect now, Larry, that Robert Mueller had intended to sort of pressure Dr. Corsi into a plea deal whereby he would have been admitting to a felony crime that he actually did not do. And there also seemed to be a simultaneous effort to pressure Roger Stone into certain things that seems like they would have been used in conjunction with these confessions from Michael Cohen to bring charges against Donald Trump that he would then have to defend. It seemed like that was their sort of chess game strategy for how to get Donald Trump into these impeachment proceedings right away. You and Dr. Corsi seem to have thwarted that. I mean, is my assessment roughly correct?
We thwarted it legally and ethically. We thwarted it because Dr. Corsi told the truth. Because Dr. Corsi did not threaten witnesses, as Stone is alleged to have done with Randy Credico, to kill him and his dog. I mean, Stone, asked for it and he got it at Toyota in terms of the indictment. But it's not over yet, okay? It's still hanging out there. There are forces, I believe, inside the Department of Justice. They're going to go their own way to seek information which will incriminate individuals further. There are apparently 12 criminal referrals by Mueller to various U.S. attorneys and Maine justice that are going on right now. And forget about the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz. He's just a tool. He did his investigation before. Nobody was held accountable. He sent a criminal referral on Andrew McCabe. Maybe they'll burn him to an extent, but that's the way they do it. The higher ups aren't held accountable. The middle and lower level, they find a scapegoat and they say, okay, we've got justice, and the entire corrupt machine continues on.
Yeah. Now, we have heard that former Obama and Clinton White House counsel Gregory Craig has been indicted. Isn't that sort of a big deal?
I don't think that, well, what that's going to show that he's, quote, even-handed. So he went after Gregory Craig and he indicted Gregory Craig for something that I would predict he's going to be acquitted for, which was the Foreign Agents Registration Act. He didn't register with regard to the Ukraine. Nobody in Washington registers, hardly at all. It's not right. They should, for sure. But I don't think Gregory Craig, frankly, is all that concerned about doing any time in prison right now. And who is Gregory Craig? Gregory Craig ran Clinton's impeachment defense in the White House in the late 90s and early 2000s. Up to the election there. Gregory Craig was instrumental in sending Elian Gonzalez back to Cuba. He represented the National Council of Churches. Gregory Craig is far, far left. So he had to show that he was even-handed. And interestingly enough, over the years, I'll tell a little story quickly. I never met with Clinton people. I didn't want to I was thinking, Groucho Marx, I wouldn't be part of a club that would have me as a member. But I was curious. And Gregory Craig called me and he said, Larry, I've got a matter here and I could use your help. I know you have a FOIA request. So I agreed to have lunch with him at the Capitol Grill in Washington, D.C. It was interesting. He told me, and we had one of our staff members present at the time, that as White House counsel for Obama, he couldn't stand being there. He couldn't last a few months. He says the guy is so arrogant that he wouldn't take advice from anyone. He said, I just frankly quit. And he viewed it kind of as a black-white thing, that Obama was going to take advice from some white guy. So he quit. So it was an interesting, story that Gregory Craig, with all of his ultra-leftist ideology and everything that he's done, which has, in my view, been, harmful, is that they make him a scapegoat so Mueller can. You don't expect him to be convicted by a Washington, D.C. jury. It ain't going to happen.
Right.
That's another swamp technique, a deep state technique, where they'll uncover a crime, it becomes public, and then they'll find one person to charge that looks like they charge to make the whole thing go away when there's numbers of other people involved in the same thing. They get rid of the boogeyman, and everybody's attention goes somewhere else. That's
the placebo. Kevin's absolutely right. Look at what they did with
Imran
during the Valerie Plame scandal. They found the scapegoat, Cheney's chief of staff. If a crime had really been committed there, you should have indicted Cheney, not his chief of staff.
It's really amazing. I mean, seems like the average person, you could steal a candy bar and get arrested and go to jail, but these guys are selling out our country, doing things to destroy the entire Constitution, and nothing at all happens. I mean, in the case of Imran Awan, there was good evidence that the guy was spying on Congress, warehousing data in an unregistered air-conditioned shed at 4809 Sprayer Street, and not only did they fail to investigate, they gave the evidence to his attorney and had him sign a plea deal where he just pled guilty to bank fraud, and it specifically said in the deal that he can't be charged for anything else. It's amazing, Larry, to see how these plea deals are used to put pressure on somebody like Dr. Corsi to get him to do whatever it is that they want, and at the same time they're used to totally exonerate somebody like Imran Awan, who could implicate tons of people, including presidential hopefuls like Eric Swalwell and a ton of other dopes in Congress. It really is lawfare. I mean, Kevin, you saw all this firsthand. Larry, you've seen it in your years in the Department of Justice. It's so frustrating, guys. It's hard to even...
Yeah, no, I wrote about it. I saw it in a minor way. I mean, I was, at the time, a trial prosecutor defense lawyer in the Consumer Affairs section of the Antitrust Division. And we had a case involving children's sleepwear. The Consumer Product Safety Commission stupidly had made a regulation that you had to use tris for a flame retardant on children's sleepwear because kids were catching fire, in their cribs if a cigarette fell in there or whatever. And it turned out it was carcinogenic. So we went out and we seized all this tris-related sleepwear, and there was an individual by the name of Troxler down in North Carolina who took the sleepwear, which we had seized, and sent it to Venezuela so Venezuelan kids could get cancer. And yet we could not prosecute Andy Troxler personally for that. We could only prosecute the company, which was bankrupt. And that was the trigger which caused me to start thinking about leaving the Justice Department and going and starting judicial watch someday. Same thing that Kevin saw, but on a very minor scale, how someone who was politically connected, like Andy Troxler, he knew the U.S. attorney in North Carolina, would be protected by the Justice Department, but yet people who had not committed crimes were being prosecuted for political purposes.
It's really, it causes you to lose faith in humanity to know that somebody would do that. It's really bad. People have got to support what you're doing there at freedomwatchusa.org, Larry. It's super important. And I also want to remind people to visit Kevin's website, fortheloveoffreedom.net. You can purchase Kevin's book, From the Company of Shadows, and hear all about his time in the CIA, how the CIA used this game of lawfare against Kevin, and it's a stacked deck when they're playing against you. Kevin and I do a show every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp with 2 P's and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. This is really some disturbing information that we're covering, but it's got to be spoken about. I mean, we can't just sweep this stuff under the carpet and pretend it's not happening. Guys, what can we do? Larry, you've got the citizens' grand juries happening, but what can the average person who's watching the show right now, who's obviously fed up with this kind of stuff, what do we do?
We need to band together as a group. We have a Justice League at Freedom Watch, freedomwatchusa.org. Support our cases. We do break through. We find the right judge. We get the right decision. But, you know, it was Jefferson who said, Thomas Jefferson, that when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there's liberty. And I don't want to advocate violence or anything like that. But the government needs, because the people will need to rise up one day. And that's why we need our Second Amendment. We need our First Amendment. We need all of the Bill of Rights, because this cannot continue on. It cannot. And it was Jefferson who said we would have a revolution every other generation, because it would get so corrupt that we'd have to clean the rat's nest out of Washington, D.C. And that's why I don't advocate, you know, I don't tell people who to vote for. I'm the head of a public interest group. I won't do that. I can't do that. But the reality is that if Trump is removed from office, in my view, this country is gone. And at that point, we are in a revolutionary state.
Kevin, have you ever seen this level of corruption in your time in Washington, D.C., your time at the CIA? You've protected the country in a variety of different ways. It's unprecedented, isn't it?
I've never seen anything like this. And I have to say, Trump is doing some things that I read back as an agency officer.
Sorry,
seeing
Kevin,
the corruption, he is doing things.
We lost you there for a second. Okay. Trump is doing some things.
I'm hearing some music.
Yeah, that was my. Say again, please say again, Kevin. Trump's doing some things.
Trump is doing some things that I only dreamed of as a CI officer, and then later on with Department of State anti-terrorism, and on and on. He is doing things that I thought I would never see happen from any president. And so I'm rejoicing that. But you know, guys, we have come back to the very beginning of the conflict and founding of America. They're using our tax dollars for foreign wars, to invade Syria, to drone wedding parties in secret budgets that we have no idea the millions they're spending, and they're using our tax dollars to do it. We've come all the way historically back to the beginning of what started the Revolutionary War. So we're kind of, I call it, for now, a soft civil war is going on between the founding of this country, but it's only, as Larry says, it's only going to get worse.
Wow.
It is, and we need to rise up, and we need to be prepared for that. Not to be the people that fire the first shot, but we've got to be the people that finish it. And that's where we are right now.
Yes.
And that's why we need our Second Amendment rights, and that's the reason we have our Second Amendment rights. And we try what we can in the courts, and I will always advocate peaceful and legal means, but I'm afraid that's not where we're going.
Well, and the Revolutionary War, remember, the Brits were trying to restrict firearms from the colonialists.
Right.
So we're back to that all over again.
Yeah, and we see certain things happening, mass shootings all over the place where they don't hesitate to bring up the gun laws They never seem to talk about the pharmaceuticals and the antidepressant type things that a lot of these perpetrators are allegedly involved with. Just to bring us back to our initial
Jason,
topic.
let me mention one thing.
Sure.
Yeah, let me inject one thing here. I wrote a column a while back. As a young lawyer, I worked for an international trade law firm. I represented the government of South Africa in steel cases. Mm-hmm. And I went over there 3 times during apartheid, and I was really appalled, to put it mildly, of that system and what was going on. And I came to view the South African government as corrupt and dishonest. Mm-hmm. And I did certain things to try to prevent that in the context of what I was doing at the time. But I'll tell you something. We are going the way, and I was careful when I wrote this column. You can find it at freedomwatchusa.org. We're going in the direction of South Africa right now. I don't mean that in a racial sense. Is that if these leftists take control of this country, our country is going to go down the drain the same way South Africa is going down the drain. And what's been happening in the last few years is that the government's passing laws that you can seize private property without paying compensation. And I was driving through a neighborhood a couple of weeks ago, a golf course community, and I was looking at it and I said, you know something? With this push for reparations and the ultra left and everything, we're going to get to a point where people are going to go up to the gates of these communities and say, we want your house, we want the property, just like in South Africa. And that's where we're headed. And that's why the American people need to have their Second Amendment rights, okay? Because there's going to be these crazy leftists that are now infesting the Democrat Party. It's going to get to that where people who achieved in this country are going to lose everything that they worked for if they don't stand up and legally and peacefully fight in self-defense.
That's right.
Yeah. And just to close out with our initial topic, Larry, you've had a chance to look over the Mueller report. Everybody's looked over the Mueller report, and we've heard that Nadler or Schiff, whoever it was, they're subpoenaing the full unredacted document. We haven't even touched on how the concept of showing everything in an investigative report would infringe on people like Dr. Corsi's rights. I mean, when you get investigated and they find there's not sufficient evidence to convict you of a crime, why do these people in Congress think they have a right to look at Dr. Corsi's emails? I mean, these things would be included in the unredacted report, wouldn't they? Or at least sensitive information about the investigation into Dr. Corsi and others?
Well, I've got news for Gerald Nadler. I've got news for Adam Schiff. I've got news for Chuck Schumer. I've got news for the whole lot of them. They try to do that with Dr. Corsi, and there will be massive pushback legally in the courts. We're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to roll over to them no more than we rolled over to Robert Mueller.
Outstanding.
Kevin, what can you say about the constitutional aspects of even the suggestion from Congress that they want to see this unredacted report? I mean, someone makes a false accusation that leads to an investigation. Okay, that happens, but the police, the DOJ, the FBI, Robert Mueller, they investigate, they don't find sufficient evidence to convict. How can we keep dragging people through the mud like this?
Well, the FBI at the higher ranks, I have to say, has become a Gestapo. Look how they raided Roger Stone's house and others, a bunch of jackbooted SWAT members, nothing against SWAT members, I used to be one, but busted into his house, left his deaf wife standing out on the street while they treated him like a felon when all they had to do was call him up and say, Roger, you need to come down to the station, and he would have. He'd already given his doc. This heavy-handed Gestapo stuff with the FBI is one of the things that we need to stop. That's even filtered down into police departments that are making SWAT raids that are completely unnecessary.
You experienced that firsthand in your CIA-supplied house. They came in there, they painted chemicals all over the place. I mean, there's no, which amendment is it that guarantees us to, security against search and seizure in the home? Fourth?
Yeah, they broke in the house, painted a chemical on the ceiling. They don't care. I mean, those laws don't mean.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kevin. Kevin's right. Getting back to Notre Trulock and Wen Ho Lee, when Notre Trulock, who was head of the investigation department, intelligence of the Department of Energy, uncovered that Notre Trulock had taken all of our nuclear code, that Wen Ho Lee had taken all of our nuclear codes, Louis Freeh and his goons went to his house without a warrant, got his housemate to give up his code to his computer and took everything out of his computer.
Wow.
And then when Notre complained and pushed back and hired me at Judicial Watch to represent him, with gun butts and hit his dog in his head, left the dog laying there bleeding on the floor as a warning.
Whoa.
That Notre Trulock should not reveal what he knew about FBI negligence, incompetence, or in fact intentional looking the other way with regard to Wen Ho Lee. And I later brought a lawsuit for Notre Trulock because he was being defamed as a racist against Chinese Americans, which he wasn't. I might add, he believes, as I do, that most Chinese Americans are good people. But this guy, Wen Ho Lee, had communist connections. He had gone to China with his wife. He had been compromised in all likelihood. And the race card was being used against Notre. He was being called a racist. And I sued for defamation. And in fact, it was the director of the CIA who Bush later kept on. This was during the Clinton administration, George Tenet, who gave an affidavit to, interestingly enough, Judge Ellis, the one who was presiding over Manafort's investigation, saying that this would compromise national security if my case continued on defamation. And Ellis dismissed the case. Say that judges, the deep state, the establishments of both political parties, most of them all work together to protect themselves.
Yep, exactly.
Hey, Kevin, you worked under George Tenet, didn't you?
It was George. I worked under George Tenet, and it was George Tenet that I stood against when they tried to cover up my case. He was the man in charge, and guess who his executive officer was? John Brennan. So literally, I was up against those two characters and a staff of about 8 CIA attorneys that they got paid no matter what they did, and they, of course, tried to bleed me dry. Having been them, I knew that's what they were going to do, so I just kept going. But yeah, it's a system. It's a perfected system that they had.
And later, you know, why did George W. Bush keep George Tenet on as the director of the CIA? In my opinion, it's George Tenet, as director of CIA, had access to the CIA files with all the dirt, not just on Daddy Bush when he was CIA director, but the Bush family generally. Why would you keep Clinton's director of the CIA on after you win the election? And of course, this was Tenet who later gave false and cooked information with regard to Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction for whatever reason.
Well, it seems like they were all in cahoots. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining me today. I want to remind everybody that Kevin and I are doing a regular show on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. and that is the intelligence assessment with Kevin Shipp. You can see that on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You can also see it on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And people should be going over to freedomwatchusa.org and supporting Larry and his team at Freedom Watch. It seems quite clear that Larry's defense of Dr. Jerome Corsi was the monkey wrench turned Dr. Corsi from the linchpin in a sinister plan to destroy the President of the United States into the monkey wrench in the deep state scheme that we really needed. Larry, congratulations on that victory. I want to thank you both for joining me today.
And my hats off to Kevin and to you, who are very integral to telling the truth to the American people. You're not going to get it on Fox News. You're going to get it here. Yeah.
It's great to see you again, Larry.
You too, Kevin. God bless you.
God bless you.
And you too, guys. Happy Easter and happy Hanukkah, whatever the case may be.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you, Jason.
Or in my case, both.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you. And thanks for watching, everybody.
All right, guys.
Here, guys.
See ya.